first time, so
Yes.
excited. I'm excited for the flowers out there, and for moving on and getting into the warmer weather, which will probably be there real quick. This morning, I wanted to just, for community time, I think that it's often helpful for me to, it's appropriate, right, to think about the reason why. Why do we do communion? Why do we meet together? Why do we set aside time on a Sunday morning to talk about the cross? Why do we have the little, impossible to open little communion cups?
You're not. If you flip them down,
we need instructions for those cups. I struggle with those things. But the quick and obvious answer to this is that, we should remember Jesus. We should remember the cross. We should remember what has been done for us. And I think, you can evaluate this on a variety of angles. But I think this morning I wanted to just look at it as from the angle of realizing that we are seen by God. I wonder if I can, let me see how fast I can, I already lose it. Hang on here. I have a poster. I don't know if it's not going to be big enough for everyone to see. No one can even read it because it's in the
glare.
It's a picture of snowflakes, right? And it says individuality. And this is from one of those tongue-in-cheek type things. It's called demotivators, right? Posters, you can say, usually you see those posters on office walls, and they're supposed to be teamwork or whatever. And these are totally the opposite. They're 100% sarcastic, and I find them super funny. But this one is individuality. Always remember that you're unique, just like everyone else. It sucks all the way down.
I like that.
And I just, I've always found that super funny. But I think that in a way, though, this has some truth to it for me in terms of sometimes in my walk with God, is that it's easier to be seen as part of a group versus feeling like I'm seen by God individually. And on purpose, I did, I just mentioned that, we should remember Jesus. We should remember the cross. We should remember what has been done for us, all right? And I think that, I've, in the past, I don't know how many weeks now, 5 weeks or something like that, Chandra's finishing up her grad work for her nutrition program. She's super geek, and she's got a 99% average, so I like to brag on her. But as such, I think she's potentially the teacher's pet for a couple of those professors, and one of them had said he was looking to revamp whatever study what is it?
They're
coaching videos for his classes, and so he's looking for guinea pigs, and so Chandra volunteered me to do this. And I was and naive as I was, I'm well, sure, okay, I'm happy to help, But it actually has proven to be. It's an hour commitment on a Friday night when I get home from work. It's the worst time of the week. You just roll into this video, and you're I'm being filmed for all of time. You're just drooling and. But it's proven to be pretty good, And at first I thought it was going to be nutrition coaching. So I'm okay, whatever. Yeah, don't eat sugar. Yeah, okay. Cut out some. All right, good enough. He hasn't talked about that at all. It wasn't what that was for. So I was mistaken on what exactly it was when I volunteered. But it was more just health coaching from a larger context. And one of the things that I've seen him, and I'm, get suspicious on where he's going with this thing, but over time, over these last 5 sessions, he's really helping me focus on using I statements versus we or us, or because he has me talk about how my week went, and and sometimes I can just kind of go through just some of my common pain points. Of how things are going, and I think the way that I phrase them, he's continually catching it and spinning it and say what would happen if you use an I statement there, put that back in there. And so we've been talking about that, and I'm all right, this is helpful. I'm kind of grudgingly oh, you're probably right. Yeah, this is helpful. But I think that a lot of times it's using the I statements versus we or us. It's the intention is to swing that mindset back and to a more empowering viewpoint. And I probably even say that Crystal uses this, and it's a probably very common coaching method that, sometimes it's just hard to get. You have to do it through repetition, maybe, I don't know. But I was thinking, of examples in the Bible where, where is it that I can find that individuality versus being just lumped in with a group, right? Because I can certainly go, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, and it's like, hey, I'm part of the world, cool. So I'm part of that. And it makes sense, right? But it doesn't necessarily personalize it for me in a way that it could be as, helpful if I said, for God so loved God that he gave his one and only son. Mm-hmm. I'm like, that's not what it says, right? But that's, I think, the intent, right? And so I'm kind of spinning on this, in Matthew 26, this is at the Last Supper, or I think my Bible said the first supper. What was it? I remember the subtitle of the chapter, which is in that particular translation. The translation was like the First Supper. But it says, while in Matthew 26, verse 26, it says, while they were eating, Jesus took the bread, and when he had given that thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, take and eat, this is my body. Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many, for the forgiveness of sins. And I'm like, oh, there it is again. Like, I'm part of the many. And it's totally true. I'm part of the many. This was God's plan was for the world. It, makes total sense. And then I was thinking of examples of maybe like, well, where does he act like individually? I was thinking of, Chandra reminded me of this morning, like Hagar in the Old Testament, right? Where she basically, effectively went out to die underneath a bush, I believe is the context of that, in the center, or maybe her son, and then kind of walked some distance away and like, this is the end. And God reached out to her specifically. And, there was Zacchaeus. This is one I hadn't thought about in a long time. This is like an old little Bible song from my kids' class when I was a kid. Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and I can still remember the little paper puppets, that we were as part of that song. But like he was short, and so wanted to see Jesus. The crowd was huge. Jesus making quite the stir coming into town. What did he do? He climbed up in the tree so that he could see him. And amongst all of the chaos that Jesus was going through, Jesus was able to call Zacchaeus out of this tree, and he saw him as an individual and focused on him. I think of the woman who was bleeding, same thing, huge crowd, to the point where his disciples were like, how in the heck are you going to know who touched you? I mean, that's a stupid question. Just people thronging around you, but Jesus kept looking until he found the woman who was bleeding. Right? And I think it's very powerful to me to feel like I'm not part of a group. Like, I want to be part of the group, right? Don't kick me out of the group. But I think also that it's much more powerful for me to feel like I can read the thrust of what Jesus has done because it was for me, and that personalization is really, I think, what God intends for us. In a parallel verse in the book of Luke, in Luke 22, it says, and he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, gave it to them, and said, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. In the same way, he also took the cup after supper and said, this cup is the new covenant established in my blood. It is shed for you. And it was interesting because I think of the four Gospels, I don't feel like John really mentioned the Last Supper at all. I think that was the one I was like, oh, it's not even there. And Mark had, kind of a mention of it, but it was Luke and Matthew that specifically had that, and they seem very different in terms of Luke really, he remembered it as this was done for you, given for you. And I'm wondering if it was just that was his helpful mindset as well, because he's wanting it to be, it wasn't done for us. I mean, yes, it was, right? It wasn't done for the many. Yes, it was. But it was done for me specifically, you specifically. And in Colossians 1:19, it says, For God was pleased to have all of his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Once you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. Another translation, Holman, says, holy, faultless, and blameless before him. If you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. Without blemish, free from accusation, holy, faultless, blameless, like all these things from Jesus on the cross for me, for you. And so I think that this morning, what I'm really hoping that we can just kind of grab onto, think about today as we take the juice and the bread, is that, yes, we are part of an intentional body of believers, and we gain quite a bit from that. But it wasn't done for our group necessarily. It was done for you specifically. So try to internalize that in a way that makes sense to you this morning, and really hold on to that during this week, because I think it can really reinvigorate your appreciation of what Christ has done for you. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for being able to meet here this morning. We are smaller in size this morning, but yet all over the world, small groups are meeting, praising you, just grateful for what you have done collectively for all of us, but most of all individually for each one of us. God, I thank you that we just have ample evidence throughout the Bible of your concern for us on an individual level, and that, even though I don't feel like, hey, my name's not in the Bible, I can easily see your intent for, thinking about me and for Jesus as he pressed forward with his goal to make it to the cross, to bring salvation. That was for me, and not in a selfish way, but in a way that I think the personalization just really helps. And I pray, God, that this morning we can all take that personally, understand that whether or not we really physically stood in front of the cross at that time, that Jesus would have, even today, still looks out at us from that point and say, this was for you. God, thank you for this time.